Hello, everyone. I am Melissa Forziat. I'm a keynote speaker, but also the host of this Halt and Catch Fire rewatch podcast. When I speak, my topic is something I call Take the Doughnut, which for me is an expression that means carpe diem, seize the opportunity. And an opportunity that I wanted to seize this year was going back, watching Halt and Catch Fire, and starting to talk about it with actual live humans. And we're up leveling that this time because I'm getting a chance to start talking with people who worked on this show, which is so exciting to start getting fresh takes and angles of how to look at the show that we all love. Now, having said that, before I introduce my guest, who you can see on the screen here, I just wanted to give everybody a warning. Look, if you are new to the show, my rewatch recap episodes are free, are safe for you. They are spoiler free. You won't hear anything that you don't want to hear. If you haven't seen the show all the way through, these interviews might spoil some details for you. So I just want you to be aware of that up front. This is your only warning. So having said all that, I'm so excited to welcome my guest today, which is Mike Pniewski, who played Barry on seasons 1 and an episode of season 2 as well on Halt and Catch Fire. So Mike, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so curious. You're a seasoned actor, but what was your process of actually getting onto this show? I know you had a number of credits before that, but how did you get connected with Halt and Catch Fire?
Like the process works for most people. The agent sends you an audition. I didn't really have any kind of heads up or know much about it prior to that. And then had to go through the audition process, which ended with a in-person with the decision makers who included Lisa Fincannon, who was the local casting director, and the powers that be. I think the Chris's were in the room. And yeah, it was a cool piece, interesting, and different, and obviously really well written. So I had a good time and it all worked out.
And this show was shot in Atlanta. And were you based in Atlanta at that time?
Yeah, I've been in Atlanta since 1994.
Do you find that helps when there's a show shooting in a location and you're already there, or does that not really get factored into the process?
A lot of times it does, because especially for recurring characters, that they save money on travel and hotel and per diem and all those things to have to fly somebody in and put them up. So it was helpful to be here. And it's also convenient for me because, I like living at home and working at home instead of getting on the road, which I do enough of that too.
Yeah. Well, Atlanta is a good place to be. There's so many shows that shoot there. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Atlanta's really wonderful. It's a great place to live. And it was nice to be able to work here.
Mm. Well, look, you've had so many different TV shows and films that you've worked on over the years. And I'm curious about the nuances between those two. When you approach a show like Halt and Catch Fire, what would be some of the nuances in how you approach that role versus how you might approach something that's more of like a one and done film?
Well, the cool thing is that you get to play a character over an arc of a few episodes. So you don't necessarily have to try to cram it all into one piece or into one event. You get to follow a little bit of an arc and a journey. And, what extended me, I think, on the show was the implication of Boz and I having a longer term relationship and history together. So that was always really nice. Plus, it being a period show, things were a little different, and there's a stylistic kind of quality to it. So you take all those factors into playing the moment and being true to the character, and honestly, it wasn't really hard because the writing was so good and the other actors were all so good, and they always created a great environment for all of us to just be present and just be in the moment. It gets to the point where, there's not a lot of work involved as long as you just do your homework, show up prepared, and just go with what happens. And that was a real treat to work with these guys.
Yeah, you kind of mentioned the idea of sort of the story arc a couple times there with Barry, how you didn't necessarily have a lot on the page in a lot of the episodes, and yet
Mhm.
I felt like I have a very strong sense of who I think Barry is when I watch the episodes that you're in. So how much do you build a story for him in your mind? How much work do you do in advance to try to make decisions about who he is before you even get the material?
Well, I try not to do too much before I get the material because you want to be true to what they're writing and the story that they're trying to tell. And I really try, you have to focus on what's happening in the moment. You don't want to get too much in your head thinking about stuff that's not relevant to what's happening on camera. Um, so, what I tried to do is to just read as much of the information in the scripts as they could give me to get a sense of the world and what the stakes were, what the processes were by which these guys operated day to day, a sense of history and relationship with everybody, because I think that was really important to set up in the beginning because Joe is such a disruptive force in all of that, that all of those connections had to be honest and true and honed, and they were already there. So you really get the heightened sense that you can feel like how he is slowly breaking this apart. Um, so you spend a lot of that time understanding and having a grasp of that, but the focus of the work is always on just being present in the moment. And we were fortunate that the environment they set up was really supportive of that.
So, what do you remember about the process of shooting that particular show? Does anything stand out to you as being unique compared to some of the other sets you've been on?
The main thing that was different, especially with the first episode, um, even though there was a series commitment, you're still shooting it as a pilot, and it's really laying the foundation of what's going to happen going forward. And especially that one scene that you pointed out in what you wrote to me about when they're all sitting around the table and realizing where they're at. I mean, that really is all the foundational components of what the story is going to be about. And so there's more time as you're getting ready to shoot those scenes, just drilling down and making sure everybody's clear on that. And then, spending time working on the relationship part and um, understanding what's at stake for Cardiff Electric and what's going on there just to make it really ring true and have the desired impact. So in that sense, as I recall, I believe that episode maybe took a little bit longer than a normal episode of television would take, mainly because they wanted to spend that time to get all these situations and relationships right and the reality right that we were playing in, because it's all going to be built on top of that.
Absolutely. Let's actually talk a little bit more about that scene. So, to set this up for those who haven't rewatched it recently, the pilot, there's a scene from the pilot that I think that you're in that I think is, possibly you could argue it's the most important scene in the show because the rest of the show doesn't happen without it. But to get there, Joe has come to Cardiff. He obviously has designs. He targets Gordon. He gets Gordon to start working on basically building reverse engineering an IBM PC, and then he decides to call IBM and say that they've been working on that. And this gets Cardiff in really hot water. IBM is not happy about it. And so the IBM legal team is going to start cracking down on this situation. Now, there's this very important scene where Barry is brought in as in-house counsel, and you're brought in to explain the options that Cardiff has. So in a scene with Barry, Joe and Gordon and Nathan Cardiff, the owner of the company, and
Mm-hmm.
Boz,
Mm-hmm.
Barry says the only way out of this is through. You have to actually build this PC, and not only build it, but pretend like you've been doing this all this time.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to need to bring in somebody to build the BIOS for it who's never been affiliated with this project and is totally clean from in the eyes of the
Yeah.
law.
Yeah.
And Boz gets so frustrated and he says, "This is your great idea, Barry." And Barry says, "No, actually, this was Joe's idea. This is what he's been trying to do." So I think this scene is really interesting because not only does it set up what's going to happen, like moving forward to keep these characters together now that they're together,
Hmm.
but it's also establishing some really important relationships in that one scene. There are some tensions that come to light or are highlighted that are going to be critical. So I'm curious for you, you get a scene like that on the page, you read it through, but I wonder, when you actually go to play it, when you actually go to work with the other actors and you get on set, how much does that evolve from what you read on the page to what we see on screen?
It all depends on the situation and the writers and the director and what their visions are and what they need this to be, and then also whatever the actors bring to it, because it all changes once everybody's in the space. Because all of us are all working on our own to be prepared, doing our due diligence and our homework to show up with choices and ideas and a way that we think the character walks in this life. But it all is dependent on how these pieces all come together. So while you have to come with a sense of choice and intention and direction for the character, you still have to leave a lot of pliability depending upon how everybody brings themselves into the moment. And so, as much as I could prepare for a scene like that, there's only so much that I'm going to be able to do until I get there. And because my scene, a lot of what I do in that is very reactive. And so you got to see what's coming at you. And also just the idea that our world now at Cardiff Electric has totally changed. And you got to allow that to evolve in the scene too. That's the other thing you got to be careful of, is you don't want too many of these choices to come across as if it's already been predetermined. It's got to happen in front of the camera, in front of the audience. So, we all bring what we bring to it, but then you have to leave that space for once you're all in there and, basically Joe throws the grenade in the room, we all have to react. And then we all have to make a plan on how we get out of this. And you got to allow that space to let it happen. And again, the folks who ran the show, I think did a great job of giving the actors the space to let that happen and sort of letting, they sort of created the sandbox and put the toys in it and said, all right, go. And then they let people go, and it came off pretty well.
Do you remember if there were any other sort of iterations where you were all sort of working on something that was headed in a different direction from where it ended up?
No, I don't remember anything like that. I remember that, what we came in with was pretty close to what you saw on the screen. If anything, there may have been a few things that they might have sliced out because the way the scene evolved, that didn't need to be said
Mhm.
because it kind of happens. That's one thing you discover often when you get in the space, is that the pictures are sometimes telling more of the story than you anticipated. And so a lot of times some dialogue's not necessary because the pictures are telling that story.
Yeah, and I think the bonds between certain characters comes across too, and sometimes that's all you need to know as well. If you
Yeah.
can tell, if you can already tell from the energy that two characters are having tension with each other, you don't necessarily need to have a lot of dialogue about it.
No,
Um,
no.
yeah, so I think that's really effective in that scene. Uh, a question I've been wanting to ask you is, you know, when we see Barry, Barry is constantly being just like used and abused by these new people who are coming into this team, right? But I never feel that Barry's an idiot. Like there's never sort of a dodo around Barry.
Mm-mm.
He's to me, he's a guy doing his job. He's doing it fine, and he's being asked to do probably more than he should be asked to do.
Yes.
And so I'm curious, how do you play that off when you have some scenes that are downright, denigrating, and yet, you
Oh, are you speaking
still.
of anything in particular?
I mean, if to have a scene where somebody says, Barry, you've got balls on your face, it should be that we think Barry's just like out to lunch, but
Yeah.
I don't feel that way. So I'm curious, as an actor, how do you walk that line? How do you get that to happen where somebody can feel the way that I do about Barry?
Well, I think for me, you have to just play the truth of the moment. I can't play your reaction. I certainly can't play any kind of outside judgment on the behavior or what happens to him. I think it's just the truth of the moment because, like you say, Barry is a very smart, capable attorney who obviously does a very good job. But what happens is in these kind of situations, he can become kind of socially awkward and not real slick. He's qualified, he's sharp, he's just, a little dorky. But that's okay. It's part of what makes him charming. But I think that all comes out of a real sincerity to do right by this company and by these guys. Because as you've spoken about, the relationships here in most cases go beyond just coworkers. These are people, I mean, it may have been a core group of Barry and Boz and Cardiff that started the whole thing, you know, and so they've been together and they know each other. They've probably been to each other's houses several times and know their families. And so there's a depth to those relationships. And so you gotta just trust and let that play out, and thankfully the writing was so good that as an actor, it's what you crave that all I really got to do is just not screw it up and it'll be terrific.
I mean, I think you pulled it off really well. I had faith in Barry, even if I didn't have faith in the situations that everybody was trying to put him in. And something that you had mentioned there, I'll jump to this question as well. The last episode that you're in, which is in
Mhm.
season 2, um, we see Boz has gotten out of prison, but we find out that Boz is staying at Barry's house with Barry and his wife, and that Barry that whole time was taking care of Boz's car, and that there's a real relationship there. And I'm curious if you can share more about what you think that relationship was, because we see it so on the nose in that scene, but I felt it even in season 1 before we got information like that.
Well, I always thought that again that they've all been at this from the beginning, and I think it's probably likely that they knew each other through working together, maybe from even before Cardiff came to life. But that I just felt like there was a trust and a bond because of the everybody trusts that these people are capable and they're honest and they're going to do the best they can at their work, and so that there was a bond with that. Um, and I don't know. I honestly didn't delve too deeply in it because I also felt like that there was some real natural connections that happened between all of us that I just went ahead and trusted that and played that. I didn't have to push anything or force it or think too much about it because we all got along really well. We played a lot. It was a great time working with Toby and all the guys and so that relationship that you develop as actors, in this case, you can really just allow to kind of spill over into the characters. And that comes across as just very organic and very natural and doesn't require a lot of work. And certainly that's the kind of stuff the camera loves.
Hmm. When if we go back to season 1, one of the major tasks that you're assigned is making sure that Cameron stays sort of unfettered by any other information that's already been gathered about the IBM PC and its BIOS. And
Mhm.
so you have to monitor the clean room to make sure it stays clean, which means you're put in a small little box of a room locked in there with Cameron, told you can't leave, told she can't leave. But there she is, working all hours of the day and night, mostly the night, living
Mhm.
in filth, playing loud punk music. And this is Barry's life now. So,
Yeah.
it doesn't seem to me like that's a fit with what Barry's lifestyle might have been before Cameron showed up on the scene. And I'm curious for you, like, what do you think Barry's life is outside of Cardiff Electric, where we can get a sense of how disruptive this really was to him?
I think, Barry is a guy that probably believes in a lot of order and regularity and consistency and constancy with everything that he does, and a certain level of certainty goes into pretty much all of his days. And, Joe and Cameron and all come in there and they give him anything but certainty. So it's totally disruptive. But as he says, when he wakes up from falling asleep, that there's something kind of cool about her. There's something, she's kind of funkily honest, if I even can create that word. She's cool. By the way, she's a fabulous actress. She was really fun to work with. But so he's sort of enamored by that, because there's an honesty with how she is, even if it can be off-putting to some people. I think he appreciates that. She's not a bullshitter. She's just who she is, and makes no apologies for it. And she's really good at what she does. Nobody's arguing that. Um, but I just think that Barry, and I think that's probably one of the components that makes it all interesting, is that there was a certainty and a regularity to life at Cardiff, that and a level of credibility and expectation that when Joe shows up on the scene, everything just gets blown up.
So I'd love to ask you, and you started to answer it there, what does Barry think of some of these new people he's having to interact with? With Cameron, you said sort of he thinks she's funkily honest and has an admiration, even though their styles are different and their lifestyles are certainly different. What would Barry say about Joe or about Gordon?
Well, since Barry's been working with Gordon, I think Barry likes Gordon a lot and knows Gordon is really smart and does a really, really good job in a very traditional way. But then Joe comes in and he has this very, kind of take over the room sort of personality, but yet, boy, he's really sharp. And I think what also you can't help but catch somebody's eye in this world, especially in the tech world, is that his vision for the future, from his point of view, is very clear. And a lot of it is hard to argue with, even though, he's pushy and narcissistic and about how he's going about it. It's hard to argue with the fact that his vision for the future is pretty right on. And it's just going to get more competitive. And it's more about keeping up or getting ahead of the technology than even producing the product. So I think there's sort of an excitement to that, even as unsettling as it is. So Joe is so charismatic with his presentation, that even though it makes everybody uncomfortable and some of it is questionable, you can't help but be taken in by it. And I think that's kind of what happens.
That's interesting because I mean, to say that like on behalf of Barry is interesting because his job is so very not threatened. I mean, maybe he has more job security than everybody else because of the situations Joe's creating.
Well, he'll
But
find another company to work for.
mhm,
I mean, so far, Barry doesn't have any liability in all this.
mhm.
All these other guys do. Barry's a hired gun. The rest of them are stakeholders. So, it's a different deal for Barry. But because of the personal relationships, he is invested in this thing.
Yeah, but that is an interesting observation that for Barry, he could easily get up and go somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if not for the relationships that he wants to maintain.
Mhm.
Well, do you have any favorite moments from when you were on set? Any other scenes that, were really important to you?
Well, I mean, you mentioned it a few times. The scene where I fell asleep and she draws the balls on my face was it's never happened to me before or since in my career, and so that was really really funny, and I really enjoyed that. And I remember there was quite a debate between the production team and the folks at A&E about exactly what that drawing needed to look like, because there was sort of a, I guess back in the day it was called standards and practices, but there was sort of a standards and practices version that they needed to come up with that told the story but was not grotesquely offensive. And so then so all of a sudden, by the time we're going to shoot this scene, I remember somebody coming down with a drawing saying, okay, this is what they've all agreed on. So this is what we're going to draw on your face. So anyway, it's just
That's absolutely delightful.
the creative process is interesting. But yeah, it took a lot of people to come to a decision about what exactly would tell the story and not upset too many people.
It needed to be
Um,
abstract enough while being
yeah,
clear enough.
abstract enough but clear enough. Yeah. So
Somebody's job that day or that
yes,
week was just to look at one drawing after another and
yeah,
decide.
or keep creating, or keep. Well, what if we did this, or what if this line wasn't totally completed yet, or I don't know exactly what the process was. I just know that at one point somebody came in with, okay, here it is, here's what we got. So anyway, that was really fun, and it was a fun scene to play, and that was also fun. When I took Cameron's deposition, and you see me sort of prompting her while the tape is rolling, that was a really fun scene to do. But it was just some really cool stuff and really nice people and a lot of good memories.
That was a really interesting scene because there is, oh, so much on the page, but there's so much happening between your eyes.
Hmm.
Like I think there's an entire conversation that's happening that's not the words.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, how do you like, is that something, it feels like you really need to be very connected with your scene partner to
Yep.
make a scene like that work. What was your process of getting into that with Mackenzie?
Well, I mean, I think it was just a matter of clarifying what it's about, what the objectives were, and then just listening and trusting each other in the moment. And she was so great and so responsive, and just by nature, she's always very playful and always willing to, try something different or do something unexpected. And so she was always very present, and she made it really easy. And it really was just a matter of playing the reality, and that the questions I was asking said one thing, but then what was happening between her and I was more importantly what the other thing we wanted to say. So that was really fun.
Some of the things I picked up from that, just from memory, I mean, for her, I think she is very smart. She doesn't
Hmm.
understand the legal stuff whatsoever. She's never had to, but she's a very smart person. So she picks up what Barry's putting down quickly.
Hmm.
With that guidance, she's a little bit of guidance. She's then able to sort of run with it. And then I think you almost see a playfulness that comes out in her as she figures out what Barry's doing. And that, I think what you needed to communicate in that, to me, was that Barry was very much on her side. This was not any
Yeah.
sort of a gotcha attempt. This was a
Yeah.
stick with me, kid. We'll get this right.
Yeah.
I'm telling you what you need to know. And I think there's what you've been saying about how Barry sees Cameron does sort of bleed through there, where there is an inherent respect
Hmm.
for what she is capable of. And I don't know if there's a fatherly quality about it as well, but it definitely seems like it comes across quickly that Barry is trying to do right by
Yeah.
Cameron.
Yeah.
And that has to be communicated only through looks because the words are just legalese.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it was beautifully done. Yeah, are there any other moments on set that stick out for you?
Um, Just nothing in particular, but just in general, it was always a very welcoming, very creative place to work, and you were encouraged to bring ideas and have input, and play with some stuff before we locked it down to put it on camera, and that's always nice, because sometimes this wasn't this was more of a serial drama. It wasn't a procedural show. Sometimes in the procedural shows, it's very by the book. We have to do X, Y, and Z because then so and so is going to have their big moment. We just got to do this setup. That's all we got to do. But in this case, it was really more about creating these lives and these relationships, and creating a world which was a different time, and a very volatile time, but a very different time than the time we were shooting in. So that was always really fun.
Mm. One other question about this show. I'm just springing some new ones on you. You know, it's a period piece, but a very recent history. We're looking at 80s and 90s, and I think Barry was pretty much all in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
When you kind of walked around set, or when you sort of saw some of the things that they were using to build that world, was there anything that really jumped out at you as like, yeah, this is the 80s?
Yeah, a lot of it, all of it. The wardrobe. I think I own some of those clothes at some point. And Yeah, I mean, that's always fun to just transport into another world. It's one of the cool things that we get to do as actors, is sort of step out of the life we're living in into a different time and place. And that's always fun. I mean, that's part of the fun, playing dress up and going to these different places. So they just did a really good job of setting up that world. And it was kind of fun to just try to exist in it from a different point of view than when we actually lived it.
Absolutely. Well, tell us what you're up to now. Is there anything that you have that you're working on, or that, we should be aware of that might be released?
Well, like everybody, we're all working on trying to get back to work since the strike, and it's been a little slow, but I've done this show for the Stars Network called Hightown, which is now in its third and final season. And there's a few more episodes left. That's on Stars, and a new episode drops every Friday, so you can catch that. I'm in a movie called Reptile, which is on Netflix, with Benicio del Toro and Justin Timberlake, which is a cool little suspense thriller. And I'm back writing, hoping to do some more stuff, produce another short film this year at some point. My wife and I have a company where we've done a couple of short films in the last few years that have done pretty well. So just doing all that kind of stuff.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking time to talk through the show, Mike. I know we're sort of inherently having to dig pretty deep with the memories, given it's been a while since it was shot, but it's just so fun to be able to hear all the different angles and your experience as somebody who worked on it.
Well, thanks. Thanks for bringing it back to the forefront after all these years, because I do think it's a really well-written piece, very well done, top to bottom, and it's nice to go back and take another look at it.
Well, thank you again, Mike. And okay, everybody, until next time, enjoy Halt and Catch Fire. Bye.
Thanks.